Why was she standing at the edge of the briefing tent instead of sitting at the table with the rest of them? No one asked her to move. No one acknowledged her presence at all. She was small, not just short, noticeably, almost distractingly small, 4'9" in combat boots, the kind of height that made gear look oversized and rifles look theatrical in her hands. In a platoon where bodies were built for brute endurance, she looked like a paperwork error that somehow slipped through selection. Someone had whispered the doll during workups, and the name stuck, not because she was delicate, but because no one could reconcile how someone her size had survived the same gates they had. Riley Brennan didn't react. She never did. She stood quietly, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes steady, waiting. Christmas Eve in Afghanistan didn't feel like Christmas. It felt like cold stone under elbows, like sand in teeth, like silence stretched so tight it felt dangerous. The mission was routine on paper, overwatch, observation, no engagement unless necessary. But Riley had learned long ago that routine was just another word for unpredictable, especially when people underestimated you. They mocked what they didn't understand. They joked to keep their fear quiet. She heard every word. She simply chose not to answer. When the convoy appeared through thermal optics hours later, her pulse didn't spike. She didn't feel adrenaline, just clarity, math, distance, wind. Human shapes moving through a valley that had swallowed better soldiers than the ones laughing behind her. When the storm rolled in, she felt it before she saw it, the pressure shift, the sudden cold edge. She warned them. She always warned them. They listened that time. The sandstorm didn't announce itself. It arrived like a wall collapsing from the sky. Visibility vanished. Radios screamed with static. And then gunfire close enough to feel, far enough to confuse. An ambush timed perfectly. Planned. Someone had waited for this night. Riley didn't freeze. She moved. She crawled through chaos by memory alone. By feel. By instinct sharpened over years of being told she didn't belong. When she reached higher ground, the storm masked her movement, her sound, her existence. Thermal silhouettes bloomed in her scope like ghosts unaware they were already dead. She engaged without ceremony. One shot. Then another. Then another. 9 hostiles fell that night, not to rage or heroics, but to discipline, to restraint, to precision born from being ignored long enough to become invisible. When it ended, no one joked anymore. But pride didn't settle in her chest. Relief didn't either. What she felt instead was something quieter, heavier. The understanding that doing your job well doesn't make you whole, it just lets you sleep. They thought it was over. It was. 2 days later, the high-value target surfaced again, fortified and waiting. The compound was wrong, too strong, too prepared. Assault would cost lives. Waiting meant losing him forever. The storm was returning, grounding aircraft, closing windows. Riley studied the distance and said nothing at first. Then she spoke. "I can make the shot." They stared at her like she'd spoken another language. 3 kilometers, over 3,000 meters. A distance that turned rifles into theory and bullets into wishes. She didn't argue. She didn't sell herself. She explained the math, the drop, the wind, the rotation of the earth itself. She waited. Permission came quietly. She lay alone behind the rifle, no spotter, no second chance. The world narrowed again, not to violence but to responsibility. She breathed. She accounted. She accepted the weight of what she was about to do. When the trigger broke, time stretched. 3 seconds felt like a lifetime. The target fell. There was no cheer, no roar, just silence followed by orders to move, extraction under pressure, another enemy patrol, 8 fighters, 8 rounds left. She didn't hesitate. When it was done, Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. No casualties, no speeches, just men who looked at her differently now, not with awe but with trust, the kind that matters. Recognition came later, medals offered, headlines requested. She refused most of it, not out of humility but out of discomfort. Fame didn't fit her, it never had. She framed the citation and hid it away. What mattered wasn't being known, it was being effective. Back home, years later, the name followed her. The doll, but it changed shape, became something reclaimed. A reminder that strength doesn't announce itself, it just shows up when needed. New platoon, new faces, same doubts. A young operator asked if size mattered. Riley shouldered her rifle and didn't slow down. Not when I'm behind it. The desert wind carried no applause, just echoes. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the wind feel different that night? Like it wasn't just weather but a warning. Riley noticed it before anyone else. Not because she was paranoid, because she paid attention. The ridge had gone quiet after the first contact report, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but presses in on you. The jokes faded. The casual radio chatter dried up. Even the men who never shut up went still, as if some instinct older than training told them something wasn't right. Riley lay prone behind her rifle, body pressed into stone that held no warmth. The cold crept into her bones fast. She was built compact, efficient, but that meant less insulation. She learned to manage it years ago. Extra layers, controlled breathing, ignoring discomfort like it was background noise. Snipers didn't get to complain. Through thermal optics, the valley glowed faintly. Heat signatures came and went, animals, wind-shifted rocks, false ghosts. She filtered them automatically. Her mind ran patterns while the rest of her stayed still. This was the part people didn't understand. They thought the shot was the job. The waiting was the job. Behind her, someone muttered something about Christmas, about how stupid it was to be freezing on a ridge halfway across the world while families back home were probably laughing around warm kitchens. Riley didn't turn. If she let herself think about home, she'd lose the edge she needed to stay alive. Focus was a choice. She chose it every minute. The wind shifted again. Not stronger, sharper. She reached for her kestrel without moving her head, glancing at the readings. Pressure dropping. Temperature falling faster than forecast. She didn't like surprises, especially the kind that couldn't be negotiated with. "Chief," she said quietly into the mic, "weather's changing." There was a pause, then Hale's voice, calm but alert, defined changing. "Sandstorm moving fast, 30 minutes, maybe less." No one laughed this time. Orders came down quickly: secure gear, prepare for blackout conditions. If visibility went to zero, they'd stay put. Standard procedure. Smart procedure. Riley checked her rifle lashings, double-checked optics, sealed exposed equipment. She worked methodically, the way she always did, like control itself was a form of armor. She felt the storm before it hit, a low vibration in the air, a sound like distant surf rolling toward shore. Then it was on them. The world vanished. Sand slammed into her face like needles. Wind screamed over the ridge, ripping heat away, ripping sound apart. Visibility dropped to arm's length and less. Radios filled with static. Someone shouted, someone cursed. Somewhere below them, gunfire erupted, too close, too coordinated. This wasn't random. Riley's heart rate stayed low. She'd trained for sensory deprivation. Darkness, noise, chaos. When the world took your senses away, you didn't panic, you simplified. Where am I? Where were we? Where would they be? AK fire cracked through the storm, followed by heavier, deeper bursts. Mounted gun, not blind fire, suppression. Someone had planned this. Her radio chirped once, then died into static. Contact. The word didn't even need to be said. She pushed herself forward, staying low, moving by memory and slope alone. Sand filled every gap in her gear. Wind tried to throw her sideways. She let it pass over her, using it instead of fighting it. Smaller bodies didn't always lose in storms. Sometimes they slipped through. She found Hale crouched behind a boulder, blood streaking down his temple, eyes sharp despite it. "They waited for the storm," he shouted. "East Ridge, we're pinned." "How many?" "No idea. Can't see a damn thing." She looked out into the storm. Blank, but blank didn't mean empty, it meant hidden. Her mind ran the terrain like a map unfolding in reverse. She studied this ridge, walked it, memorized it when no one thought it mattered. The outcrop, the slope, the angles they weren't watching because they assumed no one would use them. "I need higher ground," she said. Hale stared at her like she'd suggested walking into the ocean. "In this, I can't help you from here. You'll get lost." "No, I won't." He hesitated, not because he doubted her skill, but because sending someone out alone in that storm felt like gambling with a life. Riley didn't argue. She never did. She just waited. Trust isn't demanded. It's offered. Hale nodded once. "Go." She stripped down to essentials: rifle, ammo, optics, meter. Everything else stayed behind. Speed mattered more than comfort now. She moved with the wind on her shoulder, counting steps, reading the slope through her boots. 8 minutes felt like an hour. Every footstep was deliberate, every breath measured. When she reached the outcrop, she went prone and brought the thermal back up. Shapes bloomed. Enemy silhouettes clustered along the east ridge, heat bright against the storm-muted world. A machine gun team. Another pair farther south. A loose skirmish line pouring fire into where they thought the SEALs were. They didn't know exactly. That was their mistake. She memorized positions, distances, spacing. 9 shapes, maybe more beyond thermal range, enough to kill her team if left unchecked. Her radio crackled barely. "Sierra 1, say again." She adjusted her antenna, keyed the mic. "Alpha 1, I have eyes. 9 hostiles minimum, East Ridge, multiple gun teams." A pause, then Hale, broken but clear. "Can you engage?" She looked through the scope again. The storm twisted wind into something unpredictable: gusts, eddies, chaos. No spotter, no confirmation, no forgiveness for mistakes. Kelsey was down. The team was pinned. Waiting wasn't neutral anymore. It was lethal. "Yes," she said, "I can engage." Cleared hot. She settled behind the rifle, body merging with rock. Numbers filled her mind, not fear. Wind speed, direction, temperature, range. Variables stacked on variables until they became something simple. A solution. She breathed out. Squeezed. The rifle's recoil disappeared into the storm. She counted, not seconds but certainty. The first heat signature collapsed. No celebration, no pause. Second target: adjust, breathe, fire. Another dropped. They still didn't know where she was. Third, fourth, fifth. Muzzle flashes turned blindly toward her outcrop, but the storm swallowed sound and sight alike. She wasn't a threat in their minds. She was a glitch, a rumor. By the 9th shot, the firing stopped. Silhouettes scattered, fleeing into sand and darkness, abandoning positions they no longer trusted. Riley held her scope on the ridge until the last heat trace vanished. Then she keyed the mic. "East Ridge clear." Silence. Then Hale's voice, steady but changed. "Copy, Jesus, Brennan." She lowered the rifle, fingers numb, breath slow. The storm still raged, but something else had shifted. The pressure, the balance. They were alive. She didn't feel triumph. She felt responsibility easing its grip, just a little. And somewhere beneath the howling wind, Christmas night kept moving forward, indifferent to who had survived it and who hadn't. How did silence return so fast, like nothing violent had ever happened at all? The storm began to loosen its grip an hour later, not suddenly, but in hesitant breaths. Wind dropped from a scream to a growl. Sand thinned enough for shapes to return, rocks first, then men. Riley stayed prone long after the last hostile heat signature vanished, her cheek pressed to cold stone, her rifle still aligned with the ridge she'd emptied of life. Coming down from that state was always harder than entering it. In the aftermath of action, the body wanted to shake. The mind wanted to replay. Riley denied both. She cataloged instead. 9 confirmed engagements. Ammo count. No friendly movement detected. No secondary contact. The storm had done what storms always did, covered tracks, erased evidence, swallowed sound. When she finally moved back toward the platoon, she did it slowly, deliberately, making herself visible long before she reached them. You didn't surprise your own people after a firefight. Not ever. They looked different when she came into view. Not wide-eyed, not stunned, just quieter, more focused, as if something unspoken had been recalibrated. Hale met her halfway, blood dried dark on his face, eyes locked on her like he was making sure she was real. "You good?" She nodded, "Yes, Chief." He exhaled once deep, not relief, gratitude. Behind him, Kelsey sat with his leg bandaged and splinted, jaw clenched against pain. He watched her approach, then looked away, not out of shame, but because some truths were hard to face directly. Riley didn't judge him for it. People said stupid things when fear had nowhere to go. They held the ridge until first light. No one slept. No one joked. The storm moved on, leaving the world scrubbed raw and exposed. When dawn finally arrived, it painted the valley in pale blues and grays, revealing the quiet aftermath of violence. Disturbed sand, abandoned weapons, the suggestion of bodies already half buried. Confirmation patrol went out after sunrise. Riley didn't go. She stayed back, cleaning her rifle, hands steady, movements practiced. She didn't need to see the bodies to know what they'd find. She knew her work. That knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, not heavy enough to crush her, but heavy enough to keep her grounded. When the patrol returned, the look said enough. 9, someone muttered, all clean. Single shots, precision, impossible spacing given the conditions. No one said the word miracle. Soldiers didn't believe in those. They exfiltrated by mid-morning, exhausted, dehydrated, alive. Back at base, the adrenaline drained away, leaving only bone-deep fatigue and the strange emptiness that followed survival. Riley peeled off her gear in silence, stowed it properly, then sat alone with a cup of coffee she forgot to drink. That was when the doubts crept in. Not about the shots, never about the shots. About what came next. Recognition made her uncomfortable. Praise felt intrusive, like hands where they didn't belong. She learned early that being noticed often came with expectations she didn't want. Expectations to perform, to represent, to be something other than exactly what she was. Hale found her in the mess, lowering himself into the seat across from her with a grunt. "Intel updated," he said. "Our guy slipped through during the storm, headed north." Riley looked up. When? During the chaos. Of course he had. High-value targets didn't survive by accident. They survived by waiting for moments like that, when professionals were busy staying alive. Hale studied her for a long moment. "You saved lives last night." She didn't answer. "I'm putting you up for commendation." "Don't," she said quietly. He frowned. That wasn't a request. She met his eyes then. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." The words didn't comfort her. They never did. 2 days later, they were back in the field. Different valley, different geometry, same tension. Intelligence placed the target in a fortified compound, heavily guarded, prepared to move again as soon as weather allowed. The approach felt wrong from the start, too exposed, too deliberate. Riley felt the same tightening in her chest she'd felt before the storm. She watched the compound through her scope, cataloging walls, angles, guard rotations. This wasn't a place meant to be taken cleanly. This was a place designed to bleed anyone who tried. Air support was grounded, weather closing in again, time shrinking. Hale gathered the team behind cover. Options were bad and worse. Assault meant casualties. Waiting meant losing the target forever. The kind of choice commanders hated, where success and survival refused to coexist. Riley lay slightly apart from the group, running numbers she hadn't intended to run. Distances she shouldn't have been considering. Solutions that bordered on unreasonable. She didn't speak until she was sure. "I can take him from here." The words landed like dropped glass. Travis, her spotter, stared at her. "From this ridge?" "Yes." "That's over 1,000 meters." 3,010. Silence. Someone laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then stopped when no one joined in. "That's not a shot," Travis said carefully. "That's theory." Riley kept her eyes on the scope. "It's math." Hale crouched beside her. "Walk me through it." So she did, calmly, without drama. Bullet drop measured in stories, not feet. Wind drift that required prediction, not reaction. Flight time long enough for the world to move beneath the round. She didn't promise certainty. She promised preparation. Hale listened, really listened. Finally he said, "You get one chance." "I know. And if you miss?" "I won't." Not arrogance, conviction. Hale nodded once, set up. Travis swallowed. "I can spot." Riley shook her head. "No, too much delay, I'll self-correct." He didn't argue. He just stepped back, fear flickering briefly across his face. Not fear of her failing, but fear of watching someone carry that much weight alone. Riley lay behind the rifle as the world narrowed again. This time, the narrowing felt heavier. This shot wasn't about saving the team in immediate danger. This shot was about ending something, about choosing who didn't walk away. Her breathing slowed. She thought of Montana winters, of learning to shoot cans off fence posts with numb fingers, of being too small, too quiet, too easily overlooked, of all the times people assumed limitation where there was only difference. She adjusted for everything, including doubt. The target stepped into view. She fired. Time stretched. Then ended. The body dropped. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the radios seemed to hold their breath. Then Hale's voice came through, steady but awed. "Confirmed, target down." Riley cycled the bolt automatically, scanning for secondaries, heart rate already settling. The compound erupted into chaos, but it didn't matter anymore. The center was gone. Purpose evaporated. They exfiltrated clean. Later, as they moved through rock and shadow, Riley felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the discipline. Not pride. Closure. She didn't know then that the shot would follow her, that numbers would be whispered, records mentioned, history quietly adjusted. She only knew that the weight she carried had shifted again, not lighter but more balanced. Some burdens, she'd learned, didn't disappear. They simply taught you how to stand straighter under them. What happens after the impossible works, when there's no one left to shoot and nowhere left to hide from what you've done? The exfiltration was clean, almost eerily so. No pursuit, no counterattack, just the sound of boots on rock and controlled breathing as the platoon slipped back into the folds of the terrain. The compound behind them burned with confusion, not fire, guards shouting, weapons firing at shadows, commanders screaming questions that no longer had answers. Riley moved with the group, rifle slung, senses still tuned sharp. Adrenaline hadn't crashed yet. It hovered, waiting for permission. She stayed alert because letting go too soon was how people got hurt. Only when they reached the temporary rally point did Hale signal a halt. They took cover in silence. No one spoke for a long moment. It wasn't reverence. It was recalibration. The kind that happens when a shared understanding shifts shape and everyone needs a second to catch up. Kelsey sat heavily against a rock, favoring his leg. He wiped sand from his face and looked at Riley like he wanted to say something but didn't trust his voice yet. Others checked sectors they already knew were clear, more out of habit than necessity. Finally, Hale broke the quiet. "Sound off, status." One by one they answered. Green, up, no injuries, ammo low but sufficient. When it came to Riley, he paused. "Brennan." "I'm good," she said. That was it, no elaboration, no flourish. They moved again before dawn, disappearing into terrain that swallowed men without leaving a trace. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, they were ghosts, already gone, already somewhere else. Back at base, the world felt unreal. Generators hummed, boots clanged against metal stairs. Someone laughed near the chow line like nothing extraordinary had happened. Riley stripped her gear methodically, cleaning her rifle with the same care she always did. Carbon, sand, oil, repeat. The ritual grounded her. Only when the rifle was stowed did the weight arrive. Not the physical kind, the quieter one. She sat on the edge of her bunk and stared at her hands. They were steady. That bothered her more than if they'd been shaking. Somewhere between the ridge and now, she'd crossed another invisible line, one she couldn't name but felt deeply. A knock came at the doorframe. "Hale." "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She nodded. He lowered himself onto a crate across from her, elbows on knees. "Intel just confirmed it," he said. "That shot, that was over 3 kilometers." She didn't respond. "You know what that means." "I know what it did," she said quietly. Hale studied her face. "You ever regret it?" The question wasn't about rules of engagement or legality. It was about weight, about how many nights would echo with that single moment. Riley considered it carefully. "I regret that it was necessary." He nodded. "That's probably the right answer." A pause. "You don't like the attention," Hale said. "No." "Too bad, it's coming anyway." She looked up then. "I didn't do it to prove anything." "I know," he said again, "but sometimes proof happens whether you want it or not." The formalities followed quickly. Reports, debriefs, clinical language stripping emotion down to bullet points and timestamps. Riley answered questions with precision and restraint. No adjectives, no unnecessary detail. She watched officers' eyes widen when numbers were repeated. 3,010 meters, wind conditions, no spotter. She felt detached from it, like they were talking about someone else. The commendation paperwork started circulating. She tried to stop it, failed. Some things moved faster than personal preference. Word spread through the battalion, not exaggerated, not yet, just quiet acknowledgement, a recalculated respect. The jokes never came back. Kelsey found her outside the armory later that night. He stood awkwardly, weight shifting, hands shoved into pockets like a kid waiting outside a principal's office. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He cleared his throat. "I was out of line before with the stuff." She waited. "I didn't think you could do it," he admitted. "Didn't think you should be there, and I was wrong." She studied his face, not for sincerity but for fear. It was still there, just honest now. "You were scared," she said. He blinked. "Yeah." "That's allowed." He let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not holding it against me." She shrugged. "We all bring something ugly with us out there." That was the end of it. No handshake, no dramatic closure, just two soldiers adjusting their internal math. Days passed, then more. The platoon rotated out of sector, reassigned to training and standby. Riley slipped back into routine easily. Range work, conditioning, maintenance. She avoided conversations that lingered too long on that night. She didn't want it polished into legend. Legends lost truth. The Silver Star recommendation landed on her desk folded and impersonal. She read it once, then tucked it away. The language was accurate and empty all at once. Bravery, exceptional skill, extraordinary circumstances. None of it captured the silence before the shot, or the way the wind felt against her cheek, or the understanding that sometimes survival demanded precision so complete it bordered on cruelty. She didn't talk about that part. Weeks later, she found herself back on a ridge at dusk, not the same one but close enough to feel familiar. Training exercise, new team, new faces, same subtle tension. A young operator glanced at her rifle, then at her, eyebrows lifting slightly. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She'd seen that look before. Calculation mixed with doubt. She ignored it. As darkness settled, Riley lay prone and let the world narrow again, not because she had to, but because she could, because focus was where she felt most herself. She realized then that redemption didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as acceptance. Acceptance that she would always be measured by her size, her silence, her refusal to perform the version of strength people expected. Acceptance that proving yourself once didn't end the proving. It just changed the terms. She didn't resent that. Some people needed applause. She needed purpose. The night deepened. Stars appeared. Somewhere far away, a radio crackled with static and faded again. Riley breathed in the cold air and felt steady. Not celebrated. Not broken. Just exactly where she belonged. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, she allowed herself a single quiet thought, one she never voiced, never wrote down. If this was the weight she was meant to carry, she would carry it well. Because strength, she had learned, wasn't loud. It was consistent. What happens when the war moves on, but the echoes do? Riley felt it before she understood it. The space where urgency used to live. The hollow after purpose steps back and leaves its gear behind. Rotation orders came quietly, buried in routine briefings and paperwork. The platoon was heading home. Another unit would take their sector. Another set of boots would memorize the same ridgelines, feel the same wind, make the same calculations. The war didn't pause to acknowledge transitions. It simply reassigned them. Packing felt strange, too neat, too final. Riley folded her uniforms with care, each crease deliberate. She cleaned her rifle one last time in the Afghan dust, slower than usual, as if stretching the moment might make it mean more. Or less. She wasn't sure which she wanted. On the flight out, the noise of the aircraft swallowed conversation. Men slept in broken positions, heads lolling, mouths open. Exhaustion had finally claimed what discipline held at bay. Riley stayed awake, eyes closed but mind alert, replaying nothing and everything at once. She thought about the ridge, about the storm, about the shot that would never really be hers again. When they landed stateside, applause met them on the tarmac. Riley flinched at the sound. It felt misplaced, like clapping at the end of something unfinished. She accepted handshakes, nodded at words of thanks, kept her responses short. Gratitude was real, so was distance. Home came next. Montana greeted her with cold air that smelled clean and familiar. Pine and snow instead of sand and diesel. Her parents hugged her too tightly. Her younger brother grinned like she'd returned from a myth instead of a war zone. They tried not to ask questions they didn't want answers to. Riley let them talk. Normal life required effort. Sleep came in fragments. Silence felt too loud. She found herself calculating distances while driving, noting wind patterns on open roads, instinctively scanning rooftops when she entered crowded places. The habits weren't dramatic. They were practical. They also didn't turn off. The Silver Star ceremony happened months later in a quiet room with too much polish and not enough honesty. Speeches were made. Hands were shaken. Someone mentioned records. Someone else mentioned inspiration. Riley smiled when expected, clapped when appropriate. She framed the citation and put it in a closet. It wasn't shame. It just didn't belong on a wall. Back in uniform, training cycles resumed. New faces rotated in. Old ones moved on. Riley kept her head down and her standards high. She corrected mistakes gently, never publicly. She understood how fragile confidence could be and how dangerous humiliation was in teams that depended on trust. Whispers followed her anyway. The dial. Christmas Eve. 3 kilometers. She pretended not to hear. Pretending was a skill. One afternoon at the range, a young female candidate approached her hesitantly. Short, compact, eyes sharp but uncertain. "They said I should talk to you," the woman said. Riley looked up from her rifle. About what? About being small. Riley considered her for a long moment, then handed her a spare set of ear protection. "Shoot first," she said. "We'll talk after." They spent the afternoon working fundamentals. Breath, trigger control, patience. When the sun dipped low and the range emptied, the candidate finally asked, "Does it ever stop being underestimated?" Riley wiped her hands on a rag. "No." The woman frowned. But Riley added, "It does stop maturing." That seemed to help. Years passed that way. Missions came and went. Different deserts, different enemies, same mathematics of survival. Riley stayed because she was good at it, and because leaving felt like abandoning something she hadn't finished understanding yet. Then one day, the war changed again. New doctrine, new threats, less distance shooting, more drones, more screens. The rifle still mattered, but not the way it once had. Riley adapted, learned new systems, new methods. She wasn't nostalgic. She knew wars evolved or they devoured the unprepared. Still, sometimes at night, she found herself thinking about that ridge. About the version of herself who lay alone behind a rifle, while the earth turned beneath a bullet in flight. She wondered who that person would have been without the doubt, without the jokes, without the need to prove anything at all. Maybe the doubt had sharpened her. Maybe it had cost her something she'd never get back. The question stayed unanswered. On her 5th Christmas since that night, Riley volunteered for duty. It wasn't heroism. It was preference. The quiet suited her. She watched snowfall collect outside a forward operating base half a world from Montana and felt the strange symmetry of it all. Different place, same date, same silence. A junior operator sat beside her, scrolling through messages from home. "You ever think about quitting?" he asked casually. She thought about it, really thought about it. "Yes," she said. "What keeps you?" Riley looked out into the dark, knowing when to stay. He nodded like that made sense. Later that night, she stepped outside alone, cold biting at her cheeks. Stars hung overhead, indifferent and constant. She breathed in and let the moment exist without trying to frame it. She realized then that redemption wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about carrying it forward without letting it harden you. Riley Brennan was still small, still quiet, still underestimated by people who didn't know better. She didn't mind. She had learned something most never did. That strength didn't announce itself, didn't demand space, didn't need permission. It simply waited. And when the moment came, it acted. What stays with you when the war finally lets go? When there's no ridge left to return to, no rifle to clean, no silence sharp enough to hide inside? Riley felt the end, coming long before anyone said the words. It wasn't dramatic, no final mission, no closing ceremony, just a gradual thinning of urgency like a sound fading beyond hearing range. Her body still responded to alarms, to movement, to threat, but her mind had begun to lean toward something else, toward stillness, toward questions she'd postponed for years because survival had always come first. The decision arrived one quiet afternoon after training, sitting alone on a concrete step outside the armory. She watched younger operators move past her, fast, loud, confident in the way only people who hadn't been tested yet could be. She didn't envy them. She felt protective of them. She realized then she had given the job everything it had asked for. More maybe. Turning in gear felt heavier than carrying it ever had. Each piece held memory, not nostalgia, weight. She signed forms, nodded through exit briefings, ignored the phrase well-earned when it was offered like closure. Closure didn't come from paperwork. On her last day, she returned to the range alone before sunrise. The air was still, cold, honest. She set up a simple target at distance, not extreme, not impressive, just enough to feel familiar. She lay prone one last time, breath steady, body aligned with something that had shaped her for most of her adult life. When she fired, the shot landed clean. She smiled softly, not because of the hit, but because she didn't need it anymore. Civilian life didn't rush to greet her. It waited awkwardly at the edges, unsure what to do with someone who measured days in readiness instead of plans. Riley moved back to Montana into a small house near open land and long sightlines. She slept better there. Not perfectly. Better. She took a job teaching marksmanship at a local training facility. Nothing glamorous, mostly fundamentals, safety, discipline, patience. The things people thought were boring until they realized those were the only things keeping them alive. Students came and went. Some recognized her name, most didn't. She preferred it that way. Occasionally, someone would ask about Christmas Eve. She never told the story the same way twice. Sometimes she kept it technical, sometimes emotional, sometimes she changed the subject entirely. What mattered wasn't the shot. It never had been. What mattered was the moment before it, the choice to act when no one expected her to. Years later, a young girl showed up at the range with her father, small, quiet, watching more than speaking. Riley noticed her immediately, not because she reminded her of herself, but because she recognized the look. The girl struggled at first, rifle awkward in her hands, too much weight, too much expectation. Other kids snickered. Riley shut it down with a look. She knelt beside the girl and adjusted her stance gently. "You don't fight the rifle," she said. "You let it work with you." The girl nodded, eyes focused. The next shot landed closer. Then closer still. When the session ended, the girl lingered. "They say I'm too small," she said. Riley met her gaze. People say that when they don't know what else to say. The girl smiled like she'd been handed something valuable. That night, Riley sat alone on her porch, watching the sky darken over open land. The stars came out slowly, one by one, just like they had over Afghanistan all those years ago. She thought about the people she'd served with, the ones who made it home, the ones who didn't. She didn't romanticize it. She respected it. She understood now that the war had never been about proving herself. That had just been the shape it took. The real work had been learning when to listen, when to wait, and when to move, despite doubt, despite fear, despite the noise. The name "the doll" still surfaced now and then, online, in conversations she overheard. She didn't flinch at it anymore. Words lost their power when you outgrew the need to answer them. She had outgrown a lot of things. On the anniversary of that Christmas Eve, Riley returned alone to a high overlook near her home. Not a ridge, just a place where the land opened wide and the wind moved freely. She stood there quietly, hands in her pockets, no weapon in sight. She didn't count shots, didn't measure distance, didn't replay outcomes. She simply stood. She thought about dignity not as pride but as restraint, about strength not as dominance but as consistency, about resilience not as hardness but as the ability to keep choosing who you are long after the moment passes. The world had tried to define her by her size, by her silence, by a single impossible night. But she knew better. She was defined by every time she stayed calm when others panicked, by every calculation made under pressure, by every moment she acted without needing recognition. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Riley exhaled slowly and felt something settle inside her. Not relief, not regret. Peace. Not because everything had been justified, but because everything had been accepted. She turned and walked back toward the lights of home, footsteps steady, unremarkable, real. Somewhere far away, wars would continue. Doubts would persist. People would still underestimate quiet strength. But Riley Brennan no longer needed to answer any of it. Because sometimes the smallest presence carries the greatest weight. Sometimes resilience doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.